Well, I appreciate that. Thanks, Eric, and welcome to everybody who's watching. I am not going to retread the ground that I have tread many times. For those of you who have not been familiar with the work, you can go to prosecutenow.com. And at prosecutenow.com, you will see the Utah federal case that we have filed against the president, against CMS, and against the Department of Health and Human Services. If you want to understand why we refuse to use the term vaccination, that's the reason why. So go to prosecutenow.com. There you'll also see the summary of litigation, and you'll also see the draft indictment. What I can say is that we have 3 different law enforcement agencies who, in fact, are working with us right now on the development of the very first criminal indictment against one of the sociopaths that architected this global campaign of terror. And you will be hearing more about that between now and the 22nd of May. So the crime is coming. And if you haven't read the Utah filing, please do, because it is actually extremely, extremely important. And obviously, some of you are aware that George Wentz, Leslie Manookian hired me and George to build the case that ultimately led to the Florida decision that removed masks from airplanes. So we have the first win, which obviously is now benefiting everybody who has to ever be in a plane. And we are now in the middle of the preliminary injunction phase of the Utah case against CMS. But I wanted to lean heavily into the Canadian side of this question. But I want to make sure we stipulate something out of the gate. This is not a public health situation. This is not even a science situation. And while I appreciate the public health people and the scientists who love to talk about the nuance of this, it is like commenting on the merits of firearms at a shooting. This is a case of murder. It is not a case of disease. It is not a case of pandemic. This is a case of murder. And people who are currently doing the delivery of the agent of that murder are in fact people who wear lab coats. If they wore anything else, if they wore hoodies, they wore anything else, we'd call them murderers. Right now, we call them doctors. The fact of the matter is, this is premeditated global terrorism. This is premeditated domestic terrorism. And this is premeditated racketeering. And the reason why I say that is because the evidence is that Canada and the United States collaborated, and specifically during the gain-of-function moratorium. For those of you who actually don't understand the dynamics of this, the weaponization of the spike protein associated with WIV1, which is the Wuhan Institute of Virology virus 1, which was sampled from China reportedly between 2011 and 2013, which was replicated at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in 2013 and 14, which was the subject of the moratorium on the gain-of-function research, where Anthony Fauci said to Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in October of 2014, that while there was in fact a gain-of-function moratorium, his work on the weaponization of the Wuhan Institute of Virology virus spike protein was able to go on because, I quote, he had already been funded, end quote. And this study, which was done in vivo, resulted in 2 papers, one in 2015 and one in 2016, both stating that the Wuhan Institute of Virology virus 1 spike protein targeting endothelial tissue, targeting lung tissue, targeting kidney tissue, he stated that it was, and I'm quoting, poised for human emergence. So anybody who wants to sit here and pretend like this is anything other than premeditated murder is actually watching freight cars roll across Germany and wondering where neighbors are going. The fact is that there is no question whatsoever that this was a premeditated act of murder. And for those of you who have not heard it, I will not get on a show without reciting the evidence. In March of 2015, Peter Daszak, the chief architect of the deployment of this particular campaign of terror, along with Anthony Fauci and Ralph Barrick, Peter Daszak made the following statement: to sustain the funding base beyond the crisis, we need to increase the public understanding of the need for medical countermeasures such as a pan-influenza or pan-coronavirus vaccine. A key driver is the media, and the economics will follow the hype. We need to use that hype to our advantage to get to the real issues. Investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process. If you think that this is an issue that has anything to do with a virus spreading in a pandemic, you are delusional. This is a premeditated crime. They announced the crime in 2015, and conveniently, the government of Canada entered into an agreement with the distribution of the lethal agent in 2015. And specifically, that was Thomas Madden, that was Peter Cullis, and that was Peter Cullis, Thomas Madden, and Ian McLaughlin, who at the University of British Columbia developed a lipid nanoparticle that was required to first demonstrate the ability to actually do what was called gene silencing in monkeys, and then took that technology after a lawsuit, which was a $65 million lawsuit. The settlement of that lawsuit in 2012, and for those in Canada, look up that lawsuit. It was the lawsuit between Protiva, Tecmira, Alcana Therapeutics, and the University of British Columbia. After the $65 million settlement was paid in that particular case, in 2015, Alcana Therapeutics, owned by Thomas Madden and Peter Cullis, sublicensed the lipid nanoparticle technology to Moderna for the development of an mRNA vaccine during the gain-of-function moratorium, in violation of U.S. and Canadian law, because it's illegal in Canada to support and make a agent which enables the delivery of a biological weapon. That's actually illegal in Canada. And it's illegal to develop and aid in the development of a biological weapon in the United States. Those are felony violations of two parts of the criminal code of the United States, 18 U.S. Code subsection 2339, which is conspiring to commit acts of terrorism, and 18 U.S. Code section 175, funding and creating a biological weapon. The fact of the matter is, Alcana, Acuitas, and the University of British Columbia, together with Moderna, are in fact guilty of felony violations of 18 U.S. Code Section 175. And that felony violation took place in 2015, specifically during the gain-of-function moratorium. Any law enforcement official who is actually doing anything in support of Trudeau is aiding and abetting the criminal acts of the government of Canada, the criminal acts of the University of British Columbia, and the criminal acts of Acuitas, Alcana, and its principals, Thomas Madden and Peter Cullis. So, lest we sit here and pretend to stand on ceremony, the fact of the matter is, it does not matter what clinical trials have or haven't been done. That's like debating the merits of copper when a bullet is in a corpse. That is a foolish exercise. What we need to be doing is focusing all of our efforts single-handedly and directly on the criminal prosecution of terrorists who have now aided and abetted in the murder of millions. And just to put a fine point on this thing, Ralph Baric at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, in addition to being the architect of the spike protein weaponized to destroy humanity, also holds patent interest in the invention of remdesivir, which was known in its clinical trials in the early 2000s to be lethal when used in patients for a number of other pathogens. And willfully and knowingly distributing an agent that is in fact known to be harmful and fatal to humans is premeditated murder. And the fact that all of the governments inside the earshot of who's listening right now have adopted the remdesivir protocol and have adopted the acceptance of the narrative that this is in fact some sort of variation of coronavirus. The fact of the matter is neither are the case. This is in fact a bioweapon delivered by a carrier agent developed by the government of Canada. And given that Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna both pay royalties to Canadian interests, every single shot administered from Pfizer or from Moderna involve license fees that flow back to the government of Canada. So this is racketeering at the highest level, and the Canadian government is complicit and guilty of racketeering and conspiring to fund the commission of acts of terror. Eric, I could go on, as you know, for hours and hours and hours, but the point is really simple. I am tired of the conversations around debating the merits of the fine points of whether or not viruses or other things exist or don't exist. The fact of the matter is we have to focus on the crime that's being committed. We have to put our efforts on that crime. And 100% of what I'm doing is making sure that the entire world knows that anybody who actually promotes a narrative that says that there is a novel disease, anyone who promotes the narrative that says that there's a novel pathogen, and any lawyer who stipulates that there are either of those things is as complicit as Trudeau and Fauci. It's time that we draw a line in the sand and say, we the people will not stand for the domestic and international terrorism that is being done in the name of health. And that's it. That's the wrap. That's what I'm doing.